Welcome to One Book, One Coffee, where we dive deep into the books that change lives. I'm genuinely excited you're here today, because the fact that you clicked on this video tells me something important about you. While millions are scrolling through endless feeds or binge-watching the latest series, you made a different choice. You chose to invest your time in something that could fundamentally shift how you see yourself and the world around you. That's not common, and it's not small. Today we're exploring A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose by Eckhart Tolle, a book that has quietly revolutionized millions of lives since its publication. This isn't just another self-help book promising quick fixes. It's a profound exploration of human consciousness that Oprah Winfrey called the most important book she's ever featured on her show, leading to the largest online class in history with over 35 million participants. The book has sold over 5 million copies worldwide and continues to transform readers decades later. Eckhart Tolle wrote this book from a place of deep personal transformation. After suffering from severe depression and anxiety that brought him to the brink of suicide, he experienced a profound spiritual awakening at age 29 that completely changed his understanding of consciousness and suffering. For years, he sat on park benches in a state of deep bliss, simply observing life. Eventually, people began approaching him, drawn by his presence, and he started sharing what he'd learned. A New Earth represents the culmination of decades of teaching about the ego, presence, and awakening to our true purpose. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. A profound guide to awakening human consciousness and discovering your life's true purpose beyond the ego's endless demands for more. Eckhart Tolle transformed from a suicidal graduate student into one of the world's most influential spiritual teachers after a profound awakening at age 29 that dissolved years of depression and anxiety. Picture this: you're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, watching the morning rush unfold outside the window. Everyone's hurrying somewhere, phones pressed to their ears, faces tense with urgency. But every now and then, you notice someone who seems different, someone walking with a quiet presence, unhurried despite the chaos around them. There's something in their demeanor that makes you pause and wonder, what do they know that the rest of us don't? This observation brings us to one of the most fascinating insights Eckhart Tolle shares in A New Earth. The idea that humanity is standing at the threshold of a fundamental shift in consciousness, and some of us are already beginning to cross over. Now think about this for a moment. Throughout history, consciousness has evolved in waves. We moved from purely instinctual survival to developing language, from tribal thinking to individual self-awareness. But Tolle suggests we're on the cusp of something even more profound. A shift from ego-driven consciousness to what he calls awakened consciousness. It's not just personal growth we're talking about here. It's a species-wide transformation that's already beginning to unfold. You might be wondering, why now? What makes this moment in history so special? Tolle points to several compelling reasons, and when you really look at them, they start to paint a picture that's both sobering and hopeful. First, there's what he calls the dysfunction of the old consciousness. Look around at our world today: climate change, political polarization, mental health crises, the relentless pace of modern life that leaves so many people feeling empty despite material abundance. These aren't just random problems. They're symptoms of a consciousness that has become disconnected from its deeper essence. The old consciousness, dominated by what Tolle calls the ego, operates from a fundamental sense of separation and lack. It's constantly seeking more and more success, more recognition, more stuff, because it never feels complete. Think about how exhausting this is on a collective scale. Imagine billions of people, all unconsciously driven by this same compulsive need to fill an inner void through external means. No wonder our planet is straining under the pressure. But here's where it gets interesting. Tolle argues that this dysfunction has reached such an extreme that it's actually catalyzing the emergence of a new consciousness. It's like how a forest fire, devastating as it appears, creates the conditions for new growth. The intensity of our collective suffering is waking people up. They're beginning to ask deeper questions. Is this really all there is? Why do I feel so empty despite having everything I thought I wanted? What's the point of all this rushing around? You've probably felt this yourself, haven't you? That moment when you step back from the busyness of your life and wonder if there's something more meaningful you could be doing with your time on this planet. That questioning, that dissatisfaction with surface-level living, that's the beginning of awakening consciousness trying to emerge. Tolle shares a beautiful metaphor about flowers that helps illustrate this transformation. He explains that for most of human history, we've been like plants focused entirely on survival, growing strong roots, sturdy stems, protective leaves. This corresponds to our ego development, which was necessary for our species' survival. But now, many humans are ready to flower. The flowering of a plant represents its highest expression, its gift to the world. Similarly, the flowering of human consciousness represents our capacity to transcend survival mode and express our deeper essence: love, creativity, compassion, presence. What's particularly fascinating is how this shift is manifesting in our modern world. You can see it in the growing interest in mindfulness and meditation, once considered fringe practices now taught in schools and corporate boardrooms. You can see it in the rising awareness about mental health, the questioning of materialistic values, the search for purpose beyond career success. Even our technology, for all its potential to distract us, is also connecting us in ways that reveal our fundamental interconnectedness. Think about how quickly information spreads now, how a single act of kindness or courage can inspire millions within hours. This interconnectedness is making it harder to maintain the illusion of separation that the ego depends on. When you can see in real time how events on one side of the world affect people everywhere, when you can witness both tremendous suffering and incredible compassion spreading across networks, it becomes increasingly difficult to remain unconscious. The younger generations, particularly, seem to be naturally questioning many of the assumptions that previous generations took for granted. They're asking why we need to work ourselves to death, why we're destroying the environment for short-term profit, why we can't seem to solve problems that have clear solutions. This questioning itself is a sign of consciousness wanting to evolve beyond the limitations of ego-driven thinking. But perhaps the most encouraging sign Tolle points to is the increasing number of people who are experiencing what he calls presence, moments of deep peace and aliveness that exist beyond the constant chatter of the mind. These experiences are becoming more common, more accessible. They're happening to ordinary people in ordinary circumstances, not just to monks in monasteries or mystics in caves. As we sit here together, considering these ideas over our coffee, we're participating in this very shift. The fact that you're drawn to exploring these concepts, that you're willing to question the status quo of consciousness itself, suggests that you're already part of this flowering. The new earth that Tolle envisions isn't some distant utopia. It's emerging right now, one awakened individual at a time, in conversations just like this one. Picture this. You're sitting in a coffee shop, scrolling through social media, and you notice that familiar tightness in your chest when you see someone's vacation photos. Or maybe you're in a meeting and feel that surge of irritation when a colleague gets credit for something you think you deserved. Sound familiar? Well, my friend, you've just encountered what Eckhart Tolle calls the ego in action, and it's quietly running the show for most of humanity. In this section of A New Earth, Tolle pulls back the curtain on perhaps the most important yet invisible force shaping our daily experience. The ego isn't some mystical concept reserved for philosophy classrooms. It's that voice in your head right now, the one that might be judging these very words or planning what you'll do after listening to this. It's the mental construct that has convinced you that you are your thoughts, your story, your achievements, and your problems. Now think about this for a moment. When was the last time you went an entire day without that internal commentary running? That voice that says things like, "I can't believe she said that to me," or "I'm so much better at this than he is," or "Why does this always happen to me?" That's your ego, and according to Tolle, it's not actually who you are. It's more like a parasite that has learned to mimic your voice so perfectly that you've forgotten there's a difference between the host and the invader. The ego, Tolle explains, is essentially a false sense of self that's built on identification with things that aren't permanent. It's like building your house on quicksand, and then wondering why you always feel unstable. We identify with our job titles, our political beliefs, our relationship status, our possessions, even our problems and past traumas. The ego loves drama because drama gives it substance, makes it feel real and important. Here's where it gets really interesting. The ego doesn't just create individual suffering, it's responsible for the collective madness we see playing out across our planet. Think about road rage for a second. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and suddenly you're not just annoyed, you're personally offended. Your ego has transformed a simple driving mistake into an attack on your very identity as a competent driver, maybe even as a worthy human being. Now multiply that by billions of people, add in tribal identities, national pride, religious beliefs, and you begin to see how the ego creates the unconscious patterns that lead to conflict, war, and environmental destruction. Tolle shares a powerful story about watching ducks in a park. After two ducks have a brief territorial dispute, they simply swim away from each other, flap their wings a few times to release the energy, and then continue on peacefully. They don't carry grudges, they don't replay the incident in their minds, and they certainly don't build elaborate narratives about what the other duck's behavior says about the state of duck society. But humans. We can nurse a grudge from a traffic incident for hours, sometimes days. We'll tell the story to our friends, embellish it, make ourselves the hero or the victim, and feed the ego's insatiable appetite for drama. The ego operates through what Tolle calls unconscious patterns. These are automatic responses we've developed that feel so natural we don't even question them. Maybe you always get defensive when someone offers constructive criticism, or you find yourself constantly comparing your life to others on social media. These aren't conscious choices. They're programmed responses that the ego uses to maintain its sense of separate self. Consider the modern phenomenon of online outrage. Someone posts an opinion we disagree with, and within seconds, we're crafting our rebuttal, our heart rate elevated, our sense of righteous indignation fully activated. The ego loves being right more than it loves being happy, more than it loves peace, sometimes even more than it loves truth. It would rather be right and miserable than wrong and free. But here's what makes this so insidious. The ego is incredibly clever at disguising itself. It can even co-opt spiritual practices and turn them into another form of identity. "I'm more enlightened than you because I meditate every day" is just the ego wearing spiritual clothes. It can take environmental activism and turn it into moral superiority. It can take charitable work and transform it into a way to feel better about ourselves compared to those selfish people who don't volunteer. The ego also loves to live in time, anywhere but the present moment. It dwells in past grievances or future anxieties because the present moment is where its power dissolves. Right now, in this very moment, if you're simply listening to these words without the mental commentary about whether you agree or disagree, without planning your response or comparing this to other things you've heard, you've temporarily stepped outside the ego's domain. Tolle suggests that recognizing these patterns is the first step toward freedom. Not fighting them, not trying to destroy the ego, but simply seeing it clearly. When you catch yourself in that familiar spiral of resentment or superiority or victimhood, You can pause and ask, who is it that's feeling offended right now? Often, that simple question is enough to create a little space between you and the automatic reaction. This isn't about becoming emotionless or passive. It's about responding to life from a place of consciousness rather than reacting from unconscious programming. It's the difference between being driven by the ego and being present to what's actually happening in this moment, free from the stories and judgments that keep us trapped in cycles of suffering. And that, my friend, is where our transformation begins. Picture this: you're scrolling through social media and you see someone posting about their latest achievement, their new car, their perfect vacation. There's that little twinge, isn't there? Maybe it's envy, maybe it's the sudden urge to post something even better about your own life. What you're witnessing, my friend, is the ego in action, both theirs and yours. And this is exactly where Eckhart Tolle takes us in this profound exploration of what he calls the core of ego. Now think about this for a moment. When was the last time you felt truly content without needing to prove anything to anyone, including yourself? It's harder than it sounds, isn't it? That's because we're dealing with something Tolle identifies as one of the most pervasive forces in human consciousness: the ego's relentless need for identity, superiority, and what he calls psychological survival. Tolle paints a picture of the ego that's both illuminating and slightly uncomfortable to recognize. He describes it as a false sense of self that feeds on identification with things, thoughts, roles, and stories about who we are. The ego, he explains, is like a parasite that has convinced us it's actually us. It's that voice in your head that's constantly comparing, judging, defending, and seeking to enhance itself through external means. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates this. Imagine two neighbors, both successful professionals. One gets a promotion, and suddenly the other feels diminished, not because anything has actually changed in their own life, but because their ego perceives a threat to its relative position. The ego doesn't just want to be good, it wants to be better than others. It doesn't just want to exist, it wants to be special, important, right. This need for superiority shows up everywhere in our modern world. Think about online debates where people argue not to find truth, but to be right. Consider the way we curate our social media profiles, presenting highlight reels of our lives. Look at how we name drop, humble brag, or feel the need to one-up someone else's story. These aren't character flaws. They're the ego's survival mechanisms in action. Tolle introduces us to a fascinating concept: psychological survival versus actual survival. Your physical body needs food, water, shelter, but the ego needs something entirely different. It needs to feel important, special, right. It needs enemies to define itself against and allies to validate its positions. It needs drama, problems to solve, and stories to tell about itself. Here's where it gets really interesting. The ego's need for identity is so strong that it will actually prefer a negative identity to no identity at all. Think about someone who's always the victim in their stories, or someone who takes pride in being the rebel, the outsider, the one who's always misunderstood. Even suffering becomes a badge of identity for the ego. Nobody has it as hard as I do becomes a twisted form of specialness. Tolle shares insights about how the ego creates what he calls enemy images. These aren't necessarily people we hate, though they can be. They're anyone or anything that threatens the ego's sense of itself. It might be a political party, a different religion, a lifestyle choice, or even a family member who doesn't validate our self-image. The ego needs these enemies because opposition gives it a sense of solidity, of knowing who it is by knowing who it's not. In our hyperconnected world, this plays out in fascinating ways. We see it in the polarization of politics, where people don't just disagree with policies but demonize those who hold different views. We see it in brand loyalty that goes beyond preference to identity. I'm not just someone who uses Apple products. I am an Apple person. The ego has found new feeding grounds in our digital age. But here's what makes Tolle's perspective so revolutionary. He's not saying we need to destroy the ego or that it's inherently evil. He's pointing out that the ego is simply a case of mistaken identity. We've confused this mental construct, this collection of thoughts and identifications, with who we actually are. It's like mistaking the character you play in a movie for your real self. The psychological survival aspect is particularly crucial to understand. When someone challenges your opinion, why does it feel like a personal attack? Because the ego has made that opinion part of its identity. When your team loses, why does it affect your mood? Because the ego has identified with the team's success as its own. When someone doesn't acknowledge your achievements, why does it sting? Because the ego requires external validation to maintain its sense of self. Tolle invites us to observe this process with what he calls the witnessing consciousness. This is the part of you that can step back and watch the ego's reactions without being completely identified with them. It's like being the director of your own movie rather than just an actor lost in the role. The beauty of recognizing the ego's core mechanisms is that recognition itself begins to dissolve their power over us. When you can see the ego's need for superiority in action, when you can catch yourself in the middle of defending a position not because it's true, but because you've identified with it, something shifts. You begin to access what Tolle calls your true nature, the consciousness that exists beyond all these mental constructs and identifications. This understanding opens the door to what Tolle describes as a new way of being in the world, one that doesn't depend on the ego's endless hunger for more, better, different. And that's exactly where our journey continues as we explore how this recognition can transform not just our individual lives, but our entire relationship with existence itself. Picture this: you're at a dinner party and you notice something fascinating happening around the table. The lawyer is being very lawyerly, dropping legal terms and speaking with measured authority. The artist is gesturing dramatically, talking about their creative vision with passionate intensity. The CEO is subtly steering conversations toward business strategy, even when someone mentions their weekend hiking trip. What's happening here? Each person has slipped into their professional persona so completely that you wonder where the actual human being went. This is exactly what Eckhart Tolle illuminates in this profound section of A New Earth, and it's something we all do, often without realizing it. We become so identified with our roles that we forget who we actually are underneath all these masks we wear. Think about your own life for a moment. How many different roles do you play in a single day? You might be a parent at breakfast, a professional in meetings, a friend at lunch, a customer at the store, a spouse in the evening. Now here's the crucial question Tolle poses. In how many of these roles are you actually being yourself, or are you simply performing what you think that role requires? The ego, Tolle explains, absolutely loves roles because they give it a sense of identity and importance. When you say, "I am a doctor," or "I am a teacher," or "I am a mother," the ego latches onto these labels like a life preserver. But here's the trap. The more we identify with these roles, the more we lose touch with our authentic self, that deeper essence that exists beyond any job title or social function. Consider how this plays out in the modern world. Social media has amplified this role-playing to an almost absurd degree. People curate their online personas so carefully that they're essentially creating fictional characters of themselves. The successful entrepreneur posting motivational quotes, the perfect parent sharing only the highlight reel of family life, the spiritual seeker who never shows doubt or struggle. These aren't necessarily lies, but they're incomplete fragments of a whole person, presented as if they represent the entire truth. Tolle shares a wonderful story about meeting someone at a social gathering who introduced himself by immediately launching into his professional credentials and achievements. The man talked for 10 minutes about his work, his success, his important connections. When Tolle gently asked, "But who are you?" the man looked genuinely confused. He had become so identified with his professional role that he had forgotten there was anything else to him. This isn't just about work roles either. We can become equally trapped in family roles, social roles, even spiritual roles. The mother who can't relate to her adult children because she's still stuck in the protective, controlling parental mode. The person who's been the funny one in their friend group for so long that they feel compelled to perform humor, even when they're actually feeling sad or serious. The spiritual seeker who becomes so attached to being enlightened that they can't admit to having ordinary human struggles. Now think about this. How does it feel when you're playing a role versus when you're just being yourself? There's usually a subtle but distinct difference. Role-playing requires energy, constant monitoring of how you're coming across, adjusting your behavior to fit expectations. Being authentic feels more effortless, more alive, more connected. The beautiful paradox Tolle points out is that when we stop trying so hard to play our roles perfectly, we often become much more effective in those roles. The teacher who brings their genuine curiosity and humanity into the classroom often connects with students far better than the one who's trying to be the perfect authority figure. The parent who can admit their mistakes and show their real emotions often builds stronger relationships with their children than the one trying to maintain an image of having it all together. But here's where it gets tricky in our modern world. Many of our systems seem to reward role-playing over authenticity. Corporate cultures often promote people who fit a certain image rather than those who bring genuine value. Social situations can feel safer when we hide behind familiar personas rather than risk showing our real selves. Tolle suggests that the way out of this trap is awareness. Start noticing when you slip into role-playing mode. Feel the subtle shift that happens in your body, your voice, your energy when you move from being authentic to performing a role. There's usually a kind of tightening, a putting on of armor, a stepping away from your natural spontaneity. The goal isn't to abandon all roles entirely, of course. We need functional roles to navigate society. The key is to hold them lightly, to remember that they're tools we use rather than who we are. When you're in a meeting, you can fulfill your professional responsibilities without losing yourself in the professional persona. When you're parenting, you can provide guidance and structure without becoming rigidly identified as the parent, who always has to have the right answer. This awareness creates space for what Tolle calls conscious role-playing, where you can step into whatever function is needed while remaining connected to your deeper self. It's like being an actor who never forgets their acting, who can play their part fully while staying rooted in their authentic being. As we move deeper into this exploration of ego and authenticity, you might find yourself noticing these patterns more clearly in your own life. That's not a problem to solve immediately, but rather an invitation to greater self-awareness and, ultimately, greater freedom from the exhausting performance of being someone you're not. Picture this. You're having a perfectly normal day when suddenly someone makes an offhand comment, and boom, you find yourself completely consumed by anger or hurt that seems way out of proportion to what actually happened. That surge of emotion feels so real, so justified, and yet somewhere deep down, you know your reaction doesn't quite match the situation. What you've just encountered, my friend, is what Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body, and understanding this concept might just change how you see every emotional storm that sweeps through your life. Think of the pain body as an invisible entity living inside you, made up of all the emotional pain you've accumulated throughout your life. Every hurt feeling you didn't fully process, every disappointment you pushed down, every moment of anger or sadness that got stored away rather than released. All of this emotional residue has formed into something that acts almost like a separate being within you. And here's the fascinating part. This pain body doesn't want to heal or disappear. It wants to survive, and it feeds on drama, conflict, and negative emotions. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly does something made of old emotional pain manage to influence your present-day life? Well, imagine the pain body as a dormant volcano. Most of the time, It lies quietly beneath the surface of your consciousness. But when the right conditions arise, perhaps you're tired, stressed, or someone triggers a particular sensitivity, it awakens with a vengeance. Suddenly, you're not just responding to what's happening now. You're reacting from the accumulated weight of every similar hurt you've ever experienced. Let's say your partner forgets to call when they said they would. A simple oversight, really. But if your pain body has stored years of feeling unimportant, neglected, or abandoned, this small incident becomes the trigger that awakens all that dormant pain. Before you know it, you're not just annoyed about the missed call, you're furious, hurt, and ready for a fight that seems to come from nowhere. The pain body has taken over, and it's hungry for more drama to feed on. What makes this particularly insidious is how the pain body operates. It doesn't want resolution or healing because that would mean its death. Instead, it wants to perpetuate itself, to create more pain that it can then absorb and grow stronger from. Think about those moments when you found yourself almost addicted to feeling angry or hurt about something. You replay the incident over and over in your mind, building a case, gathering evidence of how wronged you've been. That's the pain body at work, feeding itself on the very emotions it's creating. Consider how this plays out in our modern world of social media and instant communication. The pain body absolutely loves Twitter arguments, Facebook drama, and comment section battles. It thrives on outrage culture and the constant stream of things to be offended by. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to be perpetually angry about something, always finding the next cause for indignation? That's not necessarily because the world is getting worse. It's because their pain body has learned to feed on collective drama and has grown incredibly strong. The pain body also has a collective dimension. Families pass down emotional patterns through generations. Think about those family gatherings where the same old conflicts arise year after year, as if everyone is reading from an invisible script. That's the collective pain body of the family system playing out its familiar drama. Nations have pain bodies too, accumulated historical grievances that can be triggered and manipulated to justify conflicts that have nothing to do with present circumstances. But here's where Tolle offers us hope. The pain body can only survive in unconsciousness. The moment you recognize it for what it is, the moment you can observe it without being completely identified with it, you begin to dissolve its power over you. It's like turning on a light in a dark room where monsters seem to lurk. Suddenly, you see there are no monsters, just shadows that appeared threatening in the darkness. This doesn't mean the pain body disappears overnight. It's more like learning to recognize an old pattern. When you feel that familiar surge of disproportionate emotion, you can pause and ask yourself, is this really about what's happening right now, or is this my pain body being triggered? Am I responding to the present moment, or am I reacting from old wounds? The key is developing what Tolle calls the witness consciousness, the part of you that can observe your thoughts and emotions without being completely swept away by them. When the pain body awakens and starts its familiar routine of creating drama and feeding on conflict, you can recognize it and choose not to fuel it further. You might still feel the emotions, but you don't have to become them. This awareness transforms everything. Instead of being unconsciously driven by old emotional patterns, you begin to respond to life from a place of presence and clarity. The pain body, starved of the unconscious energy it needs to survive, gradually weakens and may even dissolve entirely. What remains is a more authentic you, one that responds to life as it actually is rather than through the distorted lens of accumulated emotional pain. Understanding the pain body isn't just personal development. It's essential for creating a more conscious world where we respond to each other from presence rather than from our accumulated wounds and grievances. Picture yourself sitting across from a friend who's just discovered something life-changing about human nature, and they're leaning forward with that spark in their eyes, eager to share what they've learned. That's exactly what we're diving into today as we explore one of the most transformative concepts from Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, the pain body, and how we can finally break free from its grip on our lives. Now you might be wondering, what exactly is this pain body that Tolle talks about? Think of it as an invisible emotional entity that lives within you, feeding on negative emotions and old hurts like some kind of energy vampire. It's made up of all the emotional pain you've accumulated throughout your life. Every rejection, disappointment, trauma, and wound that you never fully processed or released. The fascinating thing is, this pain body doesn't want to heal. It wants to survive, and it does so by creating more of the same emotional drama that originally created it. Imagine you're carrying around an invisible backpack filled with rocks, and each rock represents an old hurt or disappointment. Over time, this backpack gets heavier and heavier, but here's the kicker. You've become so used to carrying it that you don't even realize it's there anymore. The pain body works similarly. It becomes such an integrated part of your identity that you mistake its voice for your own thoughts, its emotions for your genuine feelings. Tolle shares a powerful insight about how the pain body operates. It's like a parasite that needs a host to survive, and that host is your unconscious identification with it. When something triggers an old emotional pattern, maybe your partner says something that reminds you of how your father used to criticize you, or you face rejection that echoes childhood feelings of not being good enough, the pain body suddenly springs to life. It's as if you've accidentally fed a sleeping dragon, and now it's wide awake and hungry for more emotional drama. But here's where it gets really interesting. The pain body is incredibly clever. It doesn't just feed on your pain, it actively creates situations to generate more pain. Have you ever noticed how sometimes you seem to attract the same type of difficult people, or find yourself in similar painful situations over and over again? That's not coincidence. That's your pain body at work, unconsciously drawing experiences that will feed its need for familiar suffering. The first step to breaking free is recognition. You have to catch the pain body in action, and this requires what Tolle calls present moment awareness. Think about the last time you had an emotional reaction that seemed way out of proportion to what actually happened. Maybe someone cut you off in traffic, and suddenly you were filled with rage that lasted for hours. Or perhaps a friend didn't return your text message immediately, and you spiraled into feelings of abandonment and rejection. These disproportionate reactions are classic signs that your pain body has been activated. Now, here's a practical technique that can change everything. The moment you notice an intense emotional reaction arising, instead of getting caught up in the story your mind is telling you about why you're upset, try this. Take a step back and observe the emotion itself. Where do you feel it in your body? Is it a tightness in your chest, a knot in your stomach, a tension in your shoulders? Instead of thinking about the emotion, simply feel it directly, without trying to change it or make it go away. This is revolutionary because the pain body thrives on your unconscious identification with it. The moment you become the observer of your emotional state, rather than being completely consumed by it, you've created space between you and the pain body. It's like stepping out of a movie you were completely absorbed in and suddenly remembering you're sitting in a theater. The movie is still playing, but you're no longer lost in it. Tolle emphasizes that this isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about developing what he calls conscious suffering. Instead of unconsciously perpetuating old patterns, you're bringing awareness to them. When you can observe your pain without becoming it, something miraculous happens. The pain begins to transform simply through the light of your awareness. Let's talk about a modern example that many people can relate to. Social media has become a perfect feeding ground for our collective pain bodies. How often do you find yourself scrolling through your feed, comparing your life to others, feeling inadequate or angry about political posts, or getting triggered by someone's seemingly perfect vacation photos? The pain body loves this kind of emotional junk food. But what if, the next time you notice that familiar pang of jealousy or irritation while scrolling, You paused and asked yourself, what old wound is being activated right now? The beauty of this work is that as you become more skilled at recognizing and observing your pain body, you start to see it everywhere, not just in yourself, but in others too. You begin to understand that when someone is being difficult or reactive, it's often their pain body speaking, not their true self. This awareness naturally cultivates compassion, both for yourself and others. As we wrap up this exploration, remember that breaking free from the pain body isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing practice of conscious awareness. Each time you choose observation over identification, presence over reactivity, you're literally rewiring decades of unconscious emotional patterns. You're reclaiming your power from an ancient survival mechanism that no longer serves you, and in doing so, you're opening the door to a more authentic, peaceful way of being in the world. Picture this. You're sitting with your morning coffee, scrolling through your phone, when suddenly your mind starts racing about that presentation next week, or replaying yesterday's awkward conversation with your boss. Sound familiar? What's happening in that moment is your ego pulling you away from the simple pleasure of your coffee, the warmth of the cup in your hands, the actual experience of being alive right now. This is exactly what Eckhart Tolle explores in this profound section of A New Earth, and it's something that affects every single one of us, every single day. The ego, as Tolle describes it, has a peculiar relationship with time. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time your ego was truly satisfied with the present moment? I mean genuinely content with what's happening right now, without needing to change anything, add anything, or escape to somewhere else. It's rare, isn't it? And there's a reason for that. The ego literally cannot survive in the present moment, because the ego is essentially a collection of thoughts, stories, and identities that exist in psychological time. Here's where it gets fascinating. The ego feeds on the past and the future like a vampire feeds on blood. It needs your personal history to maintain its sense of identity, constantly referencing who you were, what happened to you, your achievements, your failures, your wounds. It's like that friend who can't stop talking about their glory days in high school or keeps bringing up that time someone wronged them 5 years ago. The ego also projects into the future, creating elaborate scenarios of what might happen, what you need to achieve to be happy, what you're worried about, what you're hoping for. But notice something remarkable. Neither the past nor the future actually exist anywhere except in your mind. The past is a memory trace, and the future is an imagined projection. The only thing that actually exists is this moment, right now. And this is precisely why the ego fears the present moment like a shadow fears light. Let me give you a real-world example that might hit close to home. You're walking in nature, maybe a beautiful park or hiking trail. For a brief moment, you're completely absorbed in the beauty around you, the sound of birds, the feel of the breeze. In that moment, where is your ego? It's nowhere to be found. You're not thinking about your job title, your relationship status, your bank account, or that argument you had last week. You're simply present, simply aware, simply being. And in that state, there's a natural peace, a sense of completeness that doesn't depend on anything external. But then almost inevitably the ego reasserts itself. Maybe it starts commenting on the experience. This is nice, but I should really be getting back to work. Or, I wish I had my camera to post this on social media. Or, this reminds me of that terrible camping trip with my ex. Suddenly, you're no longer present. You're back in psychological time, and with it comes the familiar undercurrent of unease, the sense that something is missing or needs to be different. This is why Tolle says that presence dissolves psychological suffering. Most of our suffering isn't actually caused by what's happening right now, but by our thoughts about what's happening, our resistance to what is, our stories about what it means, our projections about what it might lead to. Think about anxiety, for instance. Anxiety is always about the future, about something that hasn't happened yet and might never happen. Depression often involves being trapped in past events, playing them over and over like a broken record. But right now, in this actual moment, are you okay? Are you breathing? Are you alive? Usually, the present moment itself is quite manageable, even pleasant. The ego resists this recognition because it threatens the ego's very existence. If you don't need to be someone special, if you don't need to achieve something to be complete, if you don't need to fix or change anything about this moment to be okay, then what happens to all those stories the ego has been telling you about who you are and what you need? Here's a modern parallel that might illuminate this further. Have you ever noticed how social media feeds our ego's addiction to psychological time? We're constantly posting about our past experiences or our future plans, comparing our lives to others, building and maintaining our online identity. We're rarely sharing the simple fact that we're present, that we're breathing, that we exist in this moment. There's no ego gratification in posting, "I am aware that I am aware right now." But there's tremendous ego food in posting about our vacation, our achievements, our opinions, our dramas. The beautiful thing Tolle points out is that we don't have to fight the ego or try to destroy it. We simply need to become present. Presence is like turning on a light in a dark room. The darkness doesn't struggle against the light or argue with it. It simply dissolves in the light's presence. Similarly, when we become truly present, when we anchor our attention in the now, the ego's psychological suffering naturally dissolves, not through force or effort, but through the simple power of conscious awareness. This brings us to a profound realization that sets the stage for everything that follows in our exploration. The present moment isn't just where peace can be found. It's where our true identity beyond the ego reveals itself, where transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Picture yourself sitting in a bustling coffee shop, surrounded by the constant chatter of conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the gentle clatter of cups against saucers. Now imagine, for just a moment, that all of that noise suddenly stops. Not because the world has gone silent, but because you've discovered something extraordinary, a space of perfect stillness that exists right within you, untouched by all the external chaos. This is what Eckhart Tolle calls the discovery of inner space, and it might just be the most important journey you'll ever take. You know that feeling when you're scrolling through your phone, jumping from one notification to another, one thought to the next, and suddenly you realize you've been completely lost in mental noise for hours. Tolle suggests that most of us live our entire lives trapped in this state, not just with our devices, but with our thoughts themselves. We've become so identified with the constant stream of mental chatter that we've forgotten there's actually someone listening to all those thoughts. But who is that listener? Who is the awareness behind the awareness? Think about this for a moment. When you say, "I had a thought," who is the I that observed the thought? This isn't just philosophical wordplay, this is pointing to something profoundly practical. There's a dimension of yourself that exists beyond the thinking mind, a spacious awareness that remains perfectly still even when your thoughts are racing like a hamster on a wheel. Tolle calls this inner space, and discovering it changes everything. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully. Imagine a woman named Sarah who works in a high-pressure marketing job in Manhattan. Every morning she wakes up to an immediate avalanche of thoughts. The presentation she needs to finish, the client who's unhappy, the bills that need paying, the relationship issues she's avoiding. Her mind is like a browser with 50 tabs open, each one demanding attention. Sound familiar? But one day, stuck in traffic and feeling overwhelmed, something shifts. Instead of fighting the frustration, she suddenly becomes aware that she's watching her frustration. There's Sarah, the frustrated person, and there's Sarah, the one observing the frustrated person. In that moment of recognition, a space opens up, not physical space, but inner space. The traffic is still there, the frustration might still be there, but now there's room to breathe. This inner space isn't something you need to create or achieve. It's already there, waiting to be discovered. It's like realizing you've been searching everywhere for your glasses while they were sitting on top of your head the whole time. The space has always been present. You've just been too caught up in the content of your thoughts to notice the container they're arising in. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When you begin to access this inner space regularly, your relationship with your thoughts and emotions transforms completely. Instead of being at the mercy of every mental storm that passes through, you become like the sky that remains untouched, whether it's hosting sunshine or thunderclouds. The weather patterns of your mind, anxiety, excitement, sadness, joy, they all come and go, but the sky of your awareness remains constant and peaceful. But how do you practically access this inner space in our hyperconnected, notification-driven world? Tolle suggests it's simpler than you might think, though not necessarily easy. It starts with what he calls watching the thinker. This doesn't mean analyzing your thoughts or trying to stop them. That's just more thinking. Instead, it means becoming curious about the space between thoughts, the pause before you react, the stillness that's always there beneath the surface turbulence. Try this right now as you're listening. Can you notice the brief gap between this sentence and the next one? In that microsecond of silence, there's infinite space. That's your inner space. It's not empty or void, it's vibrantly alive with pure awareness. It's what you truly are beneath all the stories, roles, and identities you've accumulated. This discovery has profound implications for how we navigate modern life. When you're stuck in traffic, instead of immediately reaching for your phone or diving into mental complaints, you can drop into that inner space. When someone sends you an inflammatory email, instead of immediately reacting from emotion, you can pause in that space of awareness and respond from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. The beauty of inner space is that it's completely portable and always available. You don't need to retreat to a monastery or wait for the perfect meditation cushion. Whether you're in a boardroom, changing a diaper, or dealing with a difficult family member, that space of stillness is right there, accessible in an instant. It's like having a secret garden that exists inside you, where you can find refuge and renewal no matter what's happening in the external world. As we move deeper into this exploration of inner space, you'll discover that this isn't just about finding moments of peace, though that's certainly a wonderful side effect. This is about recognizing the very foundation of who you are, the consciousness that makes all experience possible. It's about coming home to yourself in the deepest possible way, and from that homecoming, everything in your life begins to shift and align with a deeper intelligence and flow. Picture yourself sitting in your favorite coffee shop, steam rising from your mug, when someone asks you the most fundamental question imaginable. What's your purpose in life? Most of us would immediately start talking about our careers, our relationships, our goals and dreams. But what if I told you that beneath all those external purposes lies something far more profound, something that Eckhart Tolle calls your inner purpose? This isn't just another self-help concept we're exploring today. This is about awakening to consciousness itself as your primary purpose in life, and it might just revolutionize how you see everything. So settle in, because we're about to dive into one of the most transformative ideas from A New Earth. Tolle begins this exploration with a simple yet profound distinction. He tells us that we actually have two purposes in life, not just one. There's your outer purpose, which is what you do in the world, your career, your relationships, your projects and goals. Then there's your inner purpose, which is about awakening to who you are beyond all those roles and activities. Now, here's the fascinating part. Your inner purpose is actually your primary purpose, and it never changes. It's the same for every human being on the planet. Think about this for a moment. While your outer purpose might shift from being a student to a professional, from single to married, from one career to another, your inner purpose remains constant. It's about becoming conscious, about awakening to the present moment, about recognizing the deeper dimension of yourself that exists beyond your thoughts, emotions, and life circumstances. Tolle uses a beautiful metaphor to illustrate this. He compares our lives to a river flowing toward the ocean. The outer purpose is like the specific path the river takes, winding through different landscapes, encountering various obstacles and terrains. But the inner purpose is like the river's fundamental nature, its essence as flowing water, which never changes regardless of the landscape it moves through. But why does this matter in our daily lives? Well, consider Sarah, a marketing executive who spent years climbing the corporate ladder, believing that her next promotion would finally bring her fulfillment. She achieved every goal she set, yet felt increasingly empty inside. It wasn't until she discovered her inner purpose, that deeper awakening to presence and consciousness, that her outer work began to feel meaningful again. The same job, but now infused with awareness and presence, became a vehicle for her awakening, rather than just a means to an end. This is what Tolle means when he talks about consciousness itself being your purpose. It's not about what you do, but about the quality of consciousness you bring to whatever you're doing. Are you present? Are you aware? Are you operating from ego or from a deeper sense of being? These questions become far more important than whether you're successful in conventional terms. Now you might be wondering, but doesn't this make outer purpose irrelevant? Not at all. Tolle explains that when your inner purpose becomes primary, it actually enhances your outer purpose. When you're operating from presence and awareness, you naturally become more effective, more creative, more aligned with what truly serves not just yourself but the larger whole. Think about the people who have made the greatest positive impact in history. Whether it's Gandhi, Mother Teresa, or even contemporary figures like Oprah Winfrey, they all share something in common. Their outer purpose, their work in the world, was deeply aligned with their inner purpose of awakening and serving from a place of consciousness. They weren't just doing their jobs, they were expressing their awakened presence through their actions. This alignment creates what Tolle calls inspired action. Instead of struggling and forcing your way through life, driven by ego and fear, you begin to act from a place of flow and alignment. It's like the difference between swimming against a current and swimming with it. The effort becomes effortless, not because the work disappears, but because you're working with the natural flow of life rather than against it. But here's where it gets really practical for our modern world. In our hyperconnected, always-on society, we're constantly pulled toward outer purposes. Social media feeds us endless comparisons about what others are achieving. Career pressures demand we constantly produce and perform. Consumer culture tells us our worth depends on what we own or accomplish. Against this backdrop, awakening to your inner purpose becomes almost revolutionary. It means finding your center in the midst of chaos. It means discovering that your deepest fulfillment doesn't depend on external circumstances, but on the quality of presence you bring to each moment. Consider how this might transform something as simple as washing dishes. From an ego perspective, it's just a chore, something to get through as quickly as possible. But from the perspective of inner purpose, it becomes an opportunity to practice presence, to feel the warm water, to appreciate the simple act of caring for your home, to be fully here now. This shift in perspective doesn't just change how you experience mundane tasks, it transforms your entire relationship with life. Challenges become opportunities for growth. Setbacks become invitations to deepen your presence. Success becomes a way to serve rather than just to accumulate. As we wrap up this exploration of inner purpose, remember that this isn't about abandoning your goals or becoming passive. It's about discovering the deeper foundation from which all meaningful action arises. When consciousness itself becomes your primary purpose, everything else in your life begins to align with a deeper intelligence, a greater flow. So the next time someone asks you about your purpose, you might just surprise them with your answer. Because now you know that beneath whatever you do lies something infinitely more profound. The awakening of consciousness itself. Picture this, you're sitting in a coffee shop, and suddenly you notice something beautiful happening around you. The barista isn't just mechanically going through the motions anymore, but seems genuinely present with each customer. A stranger holds the door open with a warm smile. Someone picks up litter that isn't even theirs. These aren't random acts of kindness, my friend. According to Eckhart Tolle, these are glimpses of something much more profound happening on our planet right now. In A New Earth, Tolle paints a fascinating picture of what he calls a collective transformation that's quietly unfolding all around us. Now, before you roll your eyes thinking this sounds too good to be true, let me share what he's really talking about. This isn't some utopian fantasy where everyone suddenly becomes enlightened overnight. Instead, it's more like a slow awakening, person by person, moment by moment. Think about this for a second. Have you ever been in a room where someone walks in and the entire energy shifts? Maybe they're genuinely calm, present, and authentic in a way that makes everyone else feel more at ease. That's a small example of what Tolle suggests is happening on a much larger scale. As more individuals awaken to what he calls presence, they create ripples that affect everyone around them. But what exactly does this awakening look like in real life? Well, imagine you're stuck in traffic, and instead of honking and getting frustrated like everyone else, you simply breathe and accept the situation. You might notice that your calm energy somehow affects the driver next to you, who stops gesturing angrily and relaxes their shoulders. One person's presence influencing another, like tuning forks resonating with each other. Tolle argues that we're witnessing the birth of what he calls a new earth and a new heaven. Now, don't worry, he's not talking about some literal biblical prophecy. He's describing a shift in human consciousness, where more and more people are moving beyond the ego-driven patterns that have dominated our species for millennia. The new earth represents our transformed relationship with the physical world around us, while the new heaven points to a new dimension of consciousness becoming accessible to ordinary people. Here's where it gets really interesting. Throughout history, this kind of awakened consciousness was typically found only in rare individuals, mystics, or spiritual masters who dedicated their entire lives to inner transformation. But Tolle suggests we're living in a unique time when this awakening is becoming more widespread and accessible. It's as if humanity is reaching a tipping point where enough people are ready to transcend the old patterns of unconscious living. Consider how this plays out in our modern world. You've probably noticed that more people today are talking about mindfulness, presence, and authentic living than ever before. Meditation apps have millions of users. Corporate executives attend retreats to learn about conscious leadership. Even teenagers are learning about emotional intelligence and self-awareness in ways that previous generations never did. This isn't just a trend, according to Tolle. It's evidence of a deeper shift in human consciousness. But here's the beautiful paradox. This transformation doesn't require everyone to become spiritual teachers or retreat to monasteries. It happens through ordinary people living ordinary lives with extraordinary presence. The mother who stops multitasking long enough to truly listen to her child. The teacher who brings genuine attention to each student. The cashier who makes eye contact and offers a moment of human connection. These simple acts of presence are like seeds of the new consciousness taking root. Now you might wonder, how does this collective transformation actually work? Tolle explains it through what he calls the pain body dissolving on a collective level. Throughout human history, our species has been trapped in cycles of unconscious suffering, conflict, and dysfunction. We've repeated the same patterns of violence, greed, and separation over and over again. But as more individuals become conscious of these patterns within themselves, they stop feeding the collective pain body with their unconscious reactions. Think of it like this. Imagine humanity as a vast orchestra that's been playing out of tune for thousands of years. But now, individual musicians are starting to tune their instruments to a new frequency, the frequency of presence. As more musicians join in, the entire symphony begins to shift. The discordant noise gradually transforms into something harmonious and beautiful. This transformation isn't always smooth or linear. Tolle acknowledges that we often see intense resistance to this new consciousness, sometimes manifesting as increased conflict or chaos in the world. It's like the old patterns fighting to survive before they finally dissolve. But underneath this surface turbulence, the deeper current of awakening continues to flow. The most remarkable aspect of this collective transformation is that it's not dependent on external circumstances or social movements, though these may reflect the inner change. It's happening from the inside out, one awakened moment at a time, one person at a time. And here's the truly hopeful part. Every time you choose presence over unconsciousness, every time you respond from awareness rather than react from conditioning, you're contributing to this collective awakening. As we move forward in exploring Tolle's vision, we'll discover how this transformation manifests in our relationships, our work, and our daily interactions with the world. Because ultimately, the new Earth isn't a destination we're traveling toward. It's a reality we're creating together, one conscious breath at a time. So we've been talking about presence and how it transforms our inner world, but now comes the really practical question that I know you've been wondering about. How do we actually bring this awakened consciousness into our daily grind? How do we stay present when we're stuck in traffic, dealing with difficult coworkers, or trying to meet that impossible deadline? This is what Tolle calls the awakened doing, and it's honestly one of the most game-changing concepts in the entire book. Picture this for a moment. You're at your desk and your computer crashes right before a big presentation. In the old paradigm, your ego would immediately kick into overdrive. The mental noise would start churning out thoughts like, "This always happens to me," or "I'm going to look incompetent," or "Technology is so unreliable." Your stress levels would spike, your shoulders would tense up, and you'd probably snap at the next person who dared to speak to you. Sound familiar? But here's what awakened doing looks like in that same scenario. You notice the computer crash, you feel the initial surge of frustration, but instead of getting swept away by it, you simply observe it. You take a breath, you feel your feet on the ground, and you ask yourself, what needs to be done right now? Not from a place of panic or ego-driven urgency, but from a space of presence and clarity. Maybe you call it, maybe you find another computer, maybe you adapt your presentation. The key difference is that you're responding rather than reacting. Now, think about this. How many times have you been so caught up in the drama of a situation that you actually made it worse? The ego loves drama because drama gives it a sense of importance. It thrives on the story of how wronged you are, how unfair life is, how incompetent everyone else is. But awakened doing cuts through all of that noise and gets straight to what actually matters. What can be done right now, in this moment, to move forward constructively? Tolle shares this beautiful insight that when we're truly present, work becomes a form of meditation. I love this idea because it completely reframes how we think about our daily activities. Instead of seeing work as something we have to endure to get to the good stuff in life, we start to see it as an opportunity to practice presence. Every email becomes a chance to respond with awareness rather than reactivity. Every meeting becomes an opportunity to listen deeply, rather than just waiting for our turn to speak. But let's be honest here. This isn't always easy, especially in our hyperconnected, always-on culture. We're constantly bombarded with notifications, demands, and distractions. The ego has more ammunition than ever before to create stories and drama. Social media alone gives us endless opportunities to compare ourselves to others, to feel inadequate, or to get caught up in outrage and judgment. Here's where the rubber meets the road, though. Awakened doing isn't about becoming some Zen master who never feels stressed or frustrated. It's about developing the capacity to notice when you're getting pulled into ego-driven patterns and gently bringing yourself back to presence. It's like having an internal GPS that recalculates your route when you've taken a wrong turn. Think about a master craftsperson, maybe a carpenter or a chef. When they're fully absorbed in their work, there's no separation between them and what they're doing. They're not thinking about how great they are or how impressed people will be. They're not worried about making mistakes or comparing themselves to other craftspeople. They're simply present with the wood and the tools, or the ingredients and the flavors. This is awakened doing in its purest form. The beautiful thing is that this quality of presence is contagious. When you show up to work, to relationships, to any activity from a place of presence rather than ego, other people feel it. They might not be able to articulate what's different, but they sense that you're not caught up in the usual drama and reactivity. You become like a calm center in the storm of collective unconsciousness that dominates so much of our workplaces and communities. Now, here's a practical insight that I find incredibly helpful. Tolle suggests that we can use any routine activity as an anchor for presence. Washing dishes, walking to the mailbox, even typing on a keyboard. Instead of letting these moments be filled with mental chatter about the past or future, we can use them as opportunities to come back to the now. Feel the warm water on your hands, notice your breath, sense your body moving through space. The transformation that happens when we start practicing awakened doing is subtle but profound. Work stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you participate in consciously. Challenges become interesting puzzles rather than personal attacks. Difficult people become opportunities to practice compassion rather than sources of irritation. As we wrap up this exploration of awakened doing, I want you to consider this question. What would your typical day look like if you approached each activity from a place of presence rather than ego? Not perfectly, not all the time, but even just 10% more often. The ripple effects of that shift extend far beyond just feeling better at work. They touch every aspect of your life, creating more space, more peace, and more authentic connection with the world around you. Welcome back to One Book, One Coffee, where we're continuing our journey through Eckhart Tolle's transformative work, A New Earth. I hope you've got your favorite cup brewing because today we're diving into something absolutely beautiful, the return of joy. Not the fleeting happiness that depends on getting what we want, but that deeper, more sustainable joy that comes from our connection with being itself. You know, there's something fascinating that happens when you watch a young child discover a butterfly in the garden. Their eyes light up with pure wonder, their whole body becomes animated with delight, and for that moment nothing else exists. They're not thinking about tomorrow's responsibilities or yesterday's disappointments. They're completely present, completely alive, completely joyful. This is what Tolle calls our natural state, a state of aliveness, and joy that doesn't depend on external circumstances. But here's the thing that might surprise you. This joy never actually left us. We just buried it under layers of mental conditioning, endless thinking, and what Tolle calls the ego's relentless pursuit of more. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you felt genuinely joyful without needing a reason? Not happy because something good happened, but simply alive and vibrant for no particular cause at all. Tolle explains that this natural joy is actually our birthright. It's the joy of being itself, the aliveness that flows through us when we're not caught up in the mental noise of past and future. It's like an underground spring that's always been there, waiting to bubble up to the surface once we remove the debris that's blocking it. The debris in this case is our identification with thought, our attachment to outcomes, and our resistance to what is. Now you might be thinking, that sounds lovely, but how do I actually access this joy in my daily life? This is where Tolle's insights become beautifully practical. He suggests that joy emerges naturally when we align ourselves with the present moment, when we stop fighting reality and start flowing with it. It's not something we have to manufacture or chase, it's something we allow. Consider this. Have you ever noticed how different you feel when you're fully engaged in an activity you love? Maybe you're gardening, cooking, playing music, or even washing dishes mindfully. Time seems to disappear, your internal chatter quiets down, and there's this sense of effortless flow. That's joy emerging from presence. You're not thinking about joy, you're being joy. Tolle shares a beautiful metaphor about this. He compares our natural joy to the sun, which is always shining even when clouds obscure it. The clouds represent our thoughts, worries, and mental preoccupations. The sun represents our essential nature, pure consciousness, pure being. When the clouds part, we don't create the sunshine. We simply allow it to illuminate everything around us. But here's where it gets really interesting. Tolle explains that this joy isn't just a nice feeling, it's actually a form of intelligence. When we're connected to this deeper joy, we make better decisions, we're more creative, we're naturally more compassionate. It's as if joy opens up channels of wisdom that remain closed when we're trapped in mental suffering. Think about the people you know who seem to radiate a quiet contentment, regardless of their circumstances. They're not necessarily the ones with perfect lives or endless achievements. They're the ones who have learned to tap into this inner wellspring. They've discovered what Tolle calls the joy of being, a joy that doesn't depend on having or doing, but simply on being alive and present. Now, this doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent to life. Quite the opposite. When we're connected to this natural joy, we engage with life more fully, more authentically. We still set goals and work toward them, but we're not dependent on achieving them for our well-being. We can appreciate the journey itself, finding joy in the process rather than postponing it until some future accomplishment. Tolle offers a profound insight here. The ego always wants to postpone joy. It says, I'll be happy when I get the promotion, when I find the right relationship, when I lose the weight, when I have enough money. But being says, joy is available right now in this moment, regardless of circumstances. Which voice are you listening to in your daily life? The beautiful thing about reconnecting with natural joy is how it transforms our relationships and our impact on the world. When we're joyful from the inside out, we become a source of light for others. We're no longer energy vampires, constantly seeking validation or trying to extract happiness from external sources. Instead, we become givers, naturally sharing the abundance of our inner state. As we wrap up today's exploration, I want to leave you with this thought. Joy isn't a luxury or a bonus that comes with a perfect life. It's your natural state, your birthright as a conscious being. The question isn't whether you deserve joy, you do. The question is whether you're willing to stop looking for it in all the wrong places and start recognizing it in the simple miracle of your own aliveness. So as you go about your day, see if you can catch glimpses of this natural joy. Maybe it's in the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the taste of your morning coffee, or the simple rhythm of your breath. These aren't small things, they're doorways back to your essential nature, back to the joy that's been waiting patiently for your return. Picture yourself sitting in your favorite coffee shop, watching the world rush by outside the window. Everyone seems caught up in their own little dramas, their own urgent concerns, their own stories of who they think they are. But what if I told you that beneath all this surface chaos, something extraordinary is happening? What if humanity is actually on the verge of the most significant transformation in our species' history? This is exactly what Eckhart Tolle invites us to consider when he speaks of the new Earth. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this sounds like some pie-in-the-sky fantasy, let me share what this really means, because it's far more practical and immediate than you might imagine. The new Earth isn't some distant utopia we're hoping to reach someday. It's not about building perfect cities or eliminating all conflict through technology or politics. Instead, it's about a fundamental shift in human consciousness that's already beginning to happen, person by person, moment by moment. Think about it this way. Have you ever noticed how a single person's genuine presence can completely change the energy in a room? That's the new Earth in action. Tolle describes this transformation as the emergence of a new species of human being, not in a biological sense, but in a consciousness sense. These are people who have awakened from what he calls the dream of form, the collective madness of identifying completely with their thoughts, emotions, and life situations. They've discovered something deeper, something that connects them to all life. Now you might be wondering, what would this actually look like in our everyday world? Let me paint you a picture. Imagine walking into a workplace where people aren't constantly jockeying for position, where decisions are made from wisdom rather than ego, where conflicts are seen as opportunities for deeper understanding rather than battles to be won. This isn't fantasy. by the way. I've witnessed this transformation in organizations where even a few awakened individuals have created ripple effects that touch everyone around them. Consider the story Tolle tells about a woman who worked in a toxic corporate environment. Instead of fighting the negativity or adding to it, she simply remained present and conscious throughout her workday. She didn't preach or try to change anyone. She just showed up differently. Over time, her colleagues began to notice something about her presence. Meetings became less contentious when she was there. People found themselves speaking more thoughtfully, listening more deeply. The entire culture began to shift, not through force or manipulation, but through the power of awakened consciousness. This is how the new earth emerges, not through grand gestures or revolutionary movements, although those have their place, but through ordinary people living extraordinarily conscious lives. It's like dropping a stone into still water and watching the circles expand outward, touching shores you never imagined. But here's where it gets really interesting. Tolle suggests that we're at a critical juncture in human evolution. The old consciousness, driven by ego and the need to be right, to have more, to be better than others, has brought us to the brink of destroying ourselves and our planet. You can see this playing out everywhere, from climate change to political polarization to the mental health crisis affecting so many people today. The question becomes, will enough people awaken to this new consciousness in time to tip the scales? Think about this for a moment. What if the solution to our global challenges isn't primarily technological or political, but consciousness-based? What if peace on Earth literally begins with finding peace within ourselves? Now I know what some of you might be thinking. This sounds wonderful, but how realistic is it really? Can consciousness alone solve problems like poverty, war, and environmental destruction? Tolle would say that consciousness doesn't solve these problems directly, but it fundamentally changes how we approach them. When we're not operating from fear, greed, and the need to be right, we naturally make different choices. We collaborate instead of compete. We think long-term, instead of just grabbing what we can in the moment. Look at some of the most inspiring leaders of our time, people like Nelson Mandela or the Dalai Lama. Their power didn't come from their position or their arguments, but from their presence, their ability to remain conscious and centered even in the most challenging circumstances. They embodied the new earth consciousness, and it transformed not just their own lives but the lives of millions of others. The beautiful thing about this vision is that it doesn't require you to wait for anyone else to change. You can begin embodying new earth consciousness right now, in this moment, wherever you are. Every time you choose presence over reactivity, every time you listen deeply instead of just waiting for your turn to speak, every time you respond to conflict with curiosity rather than defensiveness, you're contributing to this planetary shift. As we move forward in our exploration of these ideas, remember that the new earth isn't something we need to create from scratch. It's something that's already here, waiting to be recognized and embodied. It lives in the spaces between our thoughts, in moments of genuine connection, in acts of unconscious kindness that happen when we're not trying to be anyone special. The question isn't whether this transformation is possible, but whether we're ready to be part of it. As we reach the end of our journey through a new earth, it becomes clear that Eckhart Tolle isn't just offering us another self-help philosophy. He's inviting us into a fundamental shift in how we experience being human. The book weaves together ancient wisdom and modern insight to show us that our suffering isn't caused by external circumstances, but by our unconscious identification with thoughts, emotions, and the stories our ego tells us about who we are. The transformation Tolle describes isn't about becoming someone different. It's about recognizing who you truly are beneath the layers of conditioning and mental noise. It's about awakening to the present moment as the only place where real life happens, and discovering that beneath all our fears and desires lies an unshakable sense of peace and aliveness. Here are the key practices that can guide this awakening. Practice the power of now through micro moments. You don't need hour-long meditations to begin. Start incredibly small. Take 3 conscious breaths while your coffee brews. Feel your feet on the ground while walking to your car, or notice the sensation of water on your hands while washing dishes. These tiny moments of presence are doorways to a deeper awareness. Be patient with yourself. The mind will wander, and that's perfectly normal. Observe your ego without judgment. Begin noticing when you're defending, comparing, or needing to be right. Instead of fighting these patterns, simply observe them with curiosity. You might say internally, "There's the ego wanting approval," or "I notice I'm making this about me." This gentle awareness gradually loosens the ego's grip without creating another battle. Transform reactivity into responsiveness. When you feel triggered, create space before responding. Take a breath, feel your body, and ask, "What would love do here?" This isn't about suppressing emotions, but about not letting unconscious reactions drive your choices. Start with smaller irritations before tackling major conflicts. Embrace the intelligence of uncertainty. Instead of always needing to know what's next, practice saying, "I don't know," with openness rather than anxiety. This creates space for new possibilities and reduces the ego's need to control every outcome. Find the sacred in the ordinary. Whether you're washing dishes, sitting in traffic, or having a difficult conversation, ask yourself, "How can I be present here?" Every moment becomes an opportunity to practice consciousness rather than just another task to complete. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you, one concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.